That single line doesn't just open the story, it detonates it. Because behind the quiet dignity of palace walls, something far more calculated was unfolding. Something that now feels less like a failed family visit and more like a perfectly staged illusion. They were supposed to see him this week. That was the promise whispered across headlines, repeated in soft diplomatic tones, carefully packaged as a healing moment between generations. But did they actually get to meet their grandfather? Or was the meeting itself nothing more than a narrative waiting to be rewritten at the last second? The deeper you look, the more unsettling the pattern becomes. Meghan never intended for Archie and Lilibet to meet him in the first place. That's not speculation, it's the only explanation that fits every contradiction that followed. Because when the trip ended, when the dust should have settled into warm family anecdotes, Harry spoke. But listen carefully to what Harry didn't say. Harry spoke about his own feelings, his own experience, his own emotional journey. Not a single word about how Archie reacted. Not a single detail about Lilibet's moment with King Charles. Silence where there should have been stories. And in this world, silence is never empty, it's evidence. Inside the institutional core of the monarchy, silence has always been sacred. An unspoken rule, a binding code. What happens behind those doors stays buried beneath centuries of tradition. But that fragile code was tested the moment Prince Harry, King Charles III, and Queen Camilla gathered at Highgrove House. This wasn't just another meeting. This was months of negotiation, a delicate balancing act wrapped in one absolute condition: total silence. No leaks, no press, no narrative manipulation, just family. And for 6 days it held. Then everything broke, because exactly 6 days later, the Sussex machinery roared back to life. Not subtly, not quietly, but explosively through a detailed, glossy People magazine cover story that read less like journalism and more like a controlled confession. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether the meeting happened. The question was why the story needed to be rewritten so quickly. The palace didn't explode in anger. That's what makes this more dangerous. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public denial. Instead, there was something colder, a quiet, exhausted resignation. Because in that moment, the palace realized something irreversible. This wasn't reconciliation. This was strategy. The People report didn't just confirm the meeting. It reshaped it. It redirected blame. It carefully positioned the Duchess of Sussex as a figure reacting to circumstances, not controlling them. And at the center of that narrative was a sudden twist, a dramatic security crisis that allegedly forced Archie and Lilibet to remain in California. A last-minute complication, an unavoidable risk, a perfectly timed explanation. But here's where the illusion cracks, because the security story doesn't hold. Revec, the independent authority controlling royal protection, doesn't operate on sudden reversals. Their decisions are structured, locked months in advance, immune to emotional last-minute shifts. No protection was removed. No emergency decision was made. No sudden threat level appeared out of nowhere. The system simply doesn't work that way. So if the security crisis wasn't real, then what was it? A cover, a narrative shield, a carefully constructed explanation designed after the fact to justify an absence that had already been decided long before the trip began. And suddenly, the entire timeline shifts into focus. The children weren't stopped from coming. They were never meant to come. The security story wasn't a reaction, it was preparation. A ready-made excuse deployed at the exact moment questions would become unavoidable. Because think about it, if the goal was truly a reunion, why build a scenario where the most important part of that reunion could collapse so easily? Why hinge everything on a variable that could conveniently fail at the last second? Unless failure was always the plan. And that's where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. For months, the world was primed for a historic moment. A grandfather facing illness, 2 grandchildren he barely knows, a rare opportunity to bridge a growing divide, emotionally irresistible, publicly powerful, too powerful to risk being ordinary. Because if Archie and Lilibet had actually met King Charles, the story would have ended there with warmth, with closure, with something real. But real moments can't be controlled. They can't be edited, reshaped, or weaponized later. An unfulfilled promise, however that's different, that can be stretched, reframed, reused, and suddenly, what looked like a missed opportunity starts to feel like something else entirely. A carefully preserved absence. A moment that never happens, but never fully disappears either. And just when the illusion seemed airtight, the cracks didn't just appear, they multiplied, exposing a pattern so glaring it could no longer hide behind carefully worded statements or glossy magazine covers. Because while the world was being fed a story about danger, about risk, about why Archie and Lilibet couldn't possibly travel, Harry was doing something that shattered the entire foundation verification of that claim in real time. Less than a week after insisting that the United Kingdom posed an unbearable threat, Harry stepped directly into a completely different kind of spotlight, the Time 100 Gala in New York. Not hidden, not protected behind layers of extreme security, but fully visible, fully engaged, standing in front of flashing cameras that Harry had spent years describing as deeply triggering. And yet there was no hesitation, no retreat. Harry smiled, posed, even leaned into the attention, as if the very thing once framed as trauma had suddenly become an advantage. That contradiction didn't just raise eyebrows, it dismantled credibility. Because if cameras are dangerous in one country but welcome in another, then what exactly determines the threat? And more importantly, who controls that narrative? The image of Harry enjoying the spectacle didn't just clash with past claims, it directly exposed them, turning what was once framed as a safety concern into something far more strategic. And then came the moment that quietly sealed it. During Harry's time in London, there was no dramatic chase, no chaos, no swarm of media waiting at every corner. Instead, there was something almost shockingly ordinary. Harry was seen walking alone through Fulham, unbothered, unnoticed, casually approaching a residence and ringing a doorbell like any other person. No panic, no threat, just reality. And that reality didn't match the story being sold. So if the danger wasn't real, then what was being protected? The answer begins to emerge in the most uncomfortable place: control. Because by maintaining a constant state of crisis, by insisting that the environment is too dangerous, too unstable, too unpredictable, the power shifts. Suddenly, access becomes conditional. Meetings become negotiations. And the children Archie and Lilibet become something far more than family members. They become leverage. Hidden, distant, always just out of reach. Not absent enough to be forgotten, but never present enough to resolve anything. And inside the palace, that realization didn't land quietly. It triggered something deeper. A defensive shift. A tightening of boundaries that now extends beyond Harry entirely. Because Prince William and Princess Catherine are no longer watching this as a distant family disagreement. They are responding to it as a direct threat to stability. The idea that Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis could be drawn into this cycle of exposure, of narrative manipulation, has reportedly led to a firm and absolute position: complete separation. No shared space, no blurred lines, no risk. That decision alone speaks louder than any public statement ever could, because it confirms what the palace now believes: this is no longer about reconciliation. It's about containment. And while one side escalates, the other withdraws. Not dramatically, not emotionally, but with a precision that feels almost final. The distance between Harry and Prince William is no longer filled with tension or arguments. It's filled with nothing. Silence so complete it feels deliberate. A removal so total it's as if the connection itself has been erased. And when Harry was excluded from Peter Phillips's wedding, it wasn't just a missed invitation, it was a message. Clear, controlled, irreversible. But the story doesn't stop inside palace walls. Because outside, across the Atlantic, another unraveling is quietly accelerating. The same narrative machinery that once built momentum is now facing resistance. Contracts cooling, partnerships fading, public perception shifting. And when figures like Bill Simmons openly dismiss the entire operation, the impact isn't just reputational, it's structural. Because the foundation of everything built after 2020 was never just independence. It was relevance. And relevance requires something new to say. But what happens when the story starts repeating itself? The stakes rise. The pressure builds. And suddenly, the absence of Archie and Lilibet isn't just a missing moment, it becomes the centerpiece of a much larger, much more unsettling question. How long can a narrative survive without resolution? How long can a promise remain unfulfilled before people stop waiting for it to happen?